Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Are there any optimists in the room? Okay, so I hope you don't find this too shocking, that it doesn't cause indigestion. I'm going to talk about the dark side of confidence. And I'd like to start with another question. Are there any overconfident people in the room? Okay, just one person. And it's typically quite unusual for overconfident people to report or regard themselves as overconfident. And that's one of the paradoxes that the talk addresses. So this talk is essentially about one main point, which is to emphasize the perils of high confidence. And I've sort of been on a quest for about a year and a half to combat American narcissism, okay? And this book you have on the table is one of the main kind of strategies or tools that I've kind of created or put together as part of this mission. So when I got approached a couple of years ago by Penguin, a big American publisher, to do a book on confidence, I thought it would be a great opportunity. I didn't know the publishers wanted a self-help book to make people more confident. So for some time, I gave them a very vague brief and a very kind of a vague proposal, and they were still expecting that. But really my goal as somebody who had at least one foot in academia and had done quite a bit of work around the science of confidence was to highlight this incredible gap between what I would regard as the fiction, but which forms part of the main rhetoric, the main populistic kind of message that we hear everywhere, not just in the US, about the benefits of high confidence. You know, the fact that self-belief matters more than anything else. The fact that if you believe in yourself, you can achieve anything. The fact that risk-taking should be glorified and promoted at the expense of being cautious or being risk-averse. And the fact that all these things are the most important key drivers of career success. So much so, I often ask people this before when I was preparing for my book, you know, if you could take one pill that would make you more hardworking, or one pill that would make you smarter, or one pill that would make you more socially aware, or one pill that would make you more knowledgeable, or one pill that would make you more confident, which one would you take? And almost everybody said, especially women, almost always said the confidence pill, okay? This was in stark contrast with the realities, what we have known from the academic world for more than 5 or 6 decades about the realities of confidence, which is that high confidence is really at best trivial or irrelevant, okay? If you look at it in the context of confidence alone or pure confidence, when you decouple it from actual abilities, actual talent, it has either no or negative consequences. So it's at best irrelevant, at worst self-destructive, and these are the things that I try to capture with my book, which, as you can see, still has the cover that the publishers had planned originally. You know, how to overcome insecurities, low self-esteem, and self-doubt. Although the book is mostly a manifesto about why we should make people less confident, not more confident, okay? So the basic premise of my work is based on a lot of scientific articles and papers that we had published before on the relationship between confidence, how good people think they are, and competence, how good they actually are, okay? And anybody with some knowledge of psychology or social psychology would know that one of the most pervasive kind of phenomena that you find in human beings universally across different cultures is that they suffer really from very, very low introspection, okay? So we are, as human beings, very incapable of accurately evaluating our skills, our talent. This is especially true when you look at abilities that are socially desirable or rewarded in the context of society. So really you find very, very weak correlations typically between confidence and competence, okay? And you find very, very few people, only a minority of people who are both competent and confident. So they are able and they're aware of their abilities. About 10% of people anywhere fit into this category. 10% of people fit into the category of having realistic self-doubt. So these are the people who lack confidence, but rightly so, because they're unable. Okay, so these are the two people who have high awareness or high insight, or the two groups. And then we have some people who we might label as perfectionist or overly self-critical, too harsh on themselves, who are more able than they actually think, okay, with the majority of people being in the overconfident group. And there have been lots of studies before the work that we have conducted, looking at people's inability to accurately estimate their skills. So for example, studies that ask people to estimate their musical skills. And these are very, very simple, perhaps the simplest methodology that you can apply. We know that any skills, any abilities are normally distributed, okay? Which means that most people will be average or close to average, which sounds like an insult today. To tell people that they're average at something is almost worse than to tell them that they're weak or incompetent. But most people are average. Studies that ask people whether they think that they have better musical skills than the average person. 70% of people think they're more musically more talented than the average person. 80% of people think they have a great sense of humor. How many people do you know who have a great sense of humor? 90% of people describe themselves as better drivers than average. 70% of people describe themselves as better lovers than average. And this is, again, across the board. But what we find, and what research has shown for over 2 or 3 decades now, is the so-called Dunning-Kruger effect, that you're particularly unable to assess your abilities the less competent you are. So most people think they're better than they actually are, but those who are really bad, really poor, really incompetent think they're great, okay? So you can assess the impact of this overconfidence epidemic or bias in many domains of life. I'm going to focus on management and the world of work, but there are so many examples. Most accidents are caused by drivers' kind of a tendency to overestimate their ability to overtake somebody, underestimate how much they have been affected by alcohol, underestimate their chances of dying and therefore not wearing a seatbelt. Most cases of gambling, and I'm not just talking about pathological gambling here, but even moderate cases of gambling have to do with very well-known, well-established overconfidence biases. Of course, financial gambling is a very good example of this. And if you think about the last financial crisis, the 2008 meltdown, which I know hasn't affected Australia as much as the rest of the world, it was the product not just of overconfident, reckless, risk-taking investment bankers and financiers, but also overconfidence in the average consumer. Okay, who thought that they might be able to afford a much better lifestyle without working that hard, and that it wouldn't be a problem, to pay back a huge loan. Most addictions have to do with overconfidence as well. Typically, you find that smokers, drinkers, people who are addicted to prescription drugs underestimate how difficult it is to quit. Most of them think that they can quit one day, but they keep addicted to those substances before. And if you look at things like the obesity epidemic, it's also tied to overconfidence. First, people's kind of overconfidence about their ability to be healthy and live a long life despite of their problems. And secondly, the tendency for those people to have too favorable, distorted self-image, okay? Which is what this slide is showing you. But overconfidence is most common, most pervasive, and most destructive in the world of management. Like in any other domain of psychology or in any other area that we want to discuss, the more powerful and influential people are, the more lives they affect. So it doesn't just affect their own life, as in the case of employees, but also it affects their subordinates, their co-workers, their environments, their organizations, and society. Some of you might be familiar with the Hogan Developmental Survey, the HDS, which looks at your derailers. What are the typical coping mechanisms that are activated when you're under stress, under pressure, or when you're not making an effort to actively manage your reputation. These are the three most common derailers found in managers. Managers tend to be more mischievous, more colorful, more bold than the average population. And this is a huge effect size, by the way. It's not just a huge effect size in terms of average norms or differences between managers and non-managers, and not just in the US, but globally. But there is actually a huge difference in the extent to which these derailers are activated, okay, which you can't see for a single report. A simple report shows your average score or how you differ in derailers or certain aspects of personality vis-a-vis a norm or the rest of the population. But managers are much more likely to display this, not just when they're under stress, because they're seen not just as kind of counterproductive elements of personalities, but as career advancers, okay? So I refer to these as toxic assets. It's the best way to look at them. And we're about to publish a version of the HDS report that contains information on the specific dimensions of the derailers. So what are the specific aspects of the bold, colorful, and imaginative cluster, which are the typical derailers found in managers. And you can see that even in the report you have overconfidence. This is probably the most relevant facet or subscale of the HDS when it comes to characterizing managers. Fantasized talent, okay? Which I think is very telling. And then being risky, impulsive, manipulative, seeming confident to others in public, distractibility, and self-display. And again, we can emphasize on the one hand how destructive and counterproductive these elements of personality are, but on the other hand, keep in mind how beneficial these are for contributing to a manager's and individual's career advancement, okay? And how the system, toxic systems, reinforce these behaviors. In very simple surveys, we asked people around the world to describe their managers with one word, okay? If you had to describe your current boss with one word, which word would you use? Most people describe them as arrogant, manipulative, emotionally volatile, and we have done other surveys, and I wanted to show you a word cloud showing all the other words, but when I looked at it this morning, there were so many swear words that I thought it was inappropriate, okay? So these are the polite and the academic terms for it, but I'm sure you can work it out. This seems like extreme cases, and maybe, you know, the statistics could just have to do with people's natural tendency to dislike work and their bosses. You know, certainly from a kind of a Marxist point of view, we could make that interpretation. But let's look at other data. Let's look at the percentage of people who are disengaged at work. So Gallup, the consultancy, has been conducting climate surveys over more than 10 years, surveying 3 or 4 million people a year, and they find year after year for over a decade now that only 30% of people like their job or are engaged at work. That matches figures on the percentage or amount of people who are considered passive job seekers, who even though they have a job, even though they are at work, they are hoping for something better, okay? And people have quantified, this is economists, not psychologists, quantifying the effects of disengagement, which is a very simple calculation to do. You just compare the average output of people who are engaged with the average output for people who are disengaged and scale that, okay? So in the US alone, disengagement costs the economy $300 billion a year. More interestingly, when you ask people who are disengaged, so the majority of workers, why they dislike their job, why they're disengaged, most of the reasons have to do with their direct line manager or boss. In fact, the number one reason is always their boss or supervisor, but some of the other reasons are also directly or indirectly linked to poor management, okay? So how is it that we keep on the one hand, you know, there's so much data available and we have all these facts and figures about managerial incompetence and how this is linked to overconfidence and arrogance and regardless of whether you look at employees' opinion polls or personality data, actual hard data, and yet people who exhibit or display these toxic attributes keep on advancing over and above others. So we are currently working on a new model of high potential identification, which is based on the simple premise that most organizations are, on the one hand, unable to truly identify people with potential for leadership. On the other hand, just like individuals, they feel very confident in their systems and keep promoting people who exhibit or display exactly these traits, being manipulative, being mischievous, being arrogant, being bold, being narcissistic. Okay? So how is it that we keep on perpetuating this narcissistic or overconfident epidemic despite these figures? And that really has to do with the fact that everywhere, in most organizations around the world, and despite cultural nuances, the factors that seem to help people emerge as leaders, emerge as somebody who is admired or rewarded by others, are almost diametrically opposed, or the reverse of the factors that are needed to actually do a good job in that role. Okay? And in the case of leadership, that is a very, very, it's a good paradigm or a good context to assess that. Because if you think about the factors that contribute to emergence in high potential or leadership programs, it's taking credit for other people's actions, backstabbing your employees, sucking up to your boss, being self-centered, being greedy, being individualistic rather than displaying collectivistic fear. That helps you get to the top. And then everybody suffers as a consequence of that. Meanwhile, people who are more altruistic, more cooperative, more other-centered, and who are not the natural self-promoters get ignored. Okay, so they end up being what we call hidden talent. And this is also very visible and is, for me, the main explanatory factor for gender differences in leadership. Last year, I wrote a little article for HBR called "Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders?" And it was shortly after Sheryl Sandberg had published her book, forcing or recommending women to lean in and become more confident. As for me, that's just crazy. We're suffering already from people who are overconfident. It's not about making women or people who aren't very competent more confident, but it's about distinguishing between confidence and competent, and just not rewarding confidence, but focusing on competent. In other words, the main reason for the surplus of incompetent men in management doesn't have to do with women, doesn't have to do with differences in ability, but has to do with the fact that most systems reward overconfidence. And overconfidence, we know, is a lot more common in men than women. Okay? So it's not about making women more like men, but either making men more like women or just ignoring or stop rewarding overconfidence. And then you might see improvements in management. And the leadership industry is slowly coming to terms to this. This is a very nice chart taken from an article by my colleague Rob Kaiser, showing the increase in investment in leadership development over the past couple of decades, and how that relates to confidence in the leadership development industry. Okay? So over the past 20 years, more and more money has been wasted, really, on leadership development, and expectations about the efficacy of these programs has been declining and declining and declining. And there's a simple reason for this, which is that mostly the leadership development industry is the self-help industry. Okay? Consists of telling people that everybody can be a great leader, that they should focus on their strengths, that they're wonderful, that they should focus on coming across as charismatic, and essentially, the focus is on faking competence rather than developing or betting on true competence. And think about the impact this is having on younger generations. Okay? So we know that in the US, in the next 10 years, almost 50% of the workforce will consist of millennials or Gen Y. We know that globally by 2025, 75% of the workforce will consist of millennials, even though we also have an aging population worldwide, and people are forced to work until they're much older than before. And we have a generation that is already quite self-obsessed and exposed to all this rhetoric of keep believing in yourself. Don't worry about what other people think of you. You're wonderful. You can be the next Steve Jobs. You can be anything you want. Okay? Don't worry about what other people think. So, and there's a great book on this by my colleague Jean Twenge called Generation Me, which has some data, but also talks about, provides a very interesting theoretical interpretation of the findings. But this is one of the most compelling and conclusive effects, longitudinal effects found in psychology. The fact that over the past 3 decades, increases in narcissism have mirrored increases in obesity in the US. I say this because you can't picture changes in internal kind of dispositions or styles or values, so it's good to take an external measure to visualize, the potential changes or growth in narcissism. And these are serious studies. These are studies that use actually time-locked designs, so where people from the same ages are tested at different points of time with the same validated. These are clinical tests to assess narcissism, okay? And there are other studies that correlate these increases with increases, for example, in materialism. There's a correlation of about 0.7. This is also negatively correlated with work ethic. So as you become more narcissistic, your work ethic, your actual drive and self-discipline goes down as well. And altruism levels have declined and are negatively correlated with these increases in narcissism. Okay, so what should we do? What's the solution? I told you I would paint a bleak story, so the pessimist in the room will be yes, 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 enjoying this, and the optimist kind of, hopefully you're thinking about something else, or thinking that I'm crazy, as they do in the US. Becoming self-aware, help people, provide people with a reality check. And let's not forget that even though I'm referring to very pervasive generic trends, it doesn't affect everybody. Remember, there's a 10% or 20% of people who are doing okay. We know that the more self-aware, the more self-knowledge, the more insight people have, the better they do in general, okay? And we define insight not as what you think of yourself, but your ability to understand how other people see you. We also refer to this as strategic self-awareness. So this is basically a one-slide summary of what my book prescribes. Which is that we should try to try to help people who are in this quadrant, who have incompetent confidence, who are more confident than they should be, whose competence is lower than their confidence, or who have a confidence surplus in a way. Give them some feedback, give them a reality check, help them understand that they're not as great as they actually are. Why? Because they will benefit from it, and we will all benefit from it. At the same time, for the minority of people who are here or here, there is really no problem. The only problem for people who are good and aware of it, who have realistic confidence, is that they shouldn't get too complacent. Okay, so that they should actually, it's good to keep some insecurities, some amount of self-doubt, just to remain being competitive and remain increasing or gaining competence. And for the people who are in the perfectionistic self-critical condition, or who are too hard on themselves, the only advice we can give them is to try to hide their insecurities. Okay, why? Because in the short run, in the short term, when interacting with others, because most people are incapable to truly evaluate competence in others, they rely on displays of confidence. Okay, so even when you're good, if you come across as a little bit insecure, or not too confident, that might harm your chances of being perceived as somebody competent. So, and you can think about a cycle, if you like, of actually, most people who are here don't really have a problem. They actually solved half of the problem already. Because if you're aware of your incompetence, if you know that you have problems, in a normal world, from an evolutionary point of view, insecurities, low confidence, and self-doubt fulfill a really important psychological function, which is to highlight a gap between the person you want to be and the person who you are, okay? And to function as almost a threat detection system or signal that tells you, look, something is not right in your life, so try to change it, okay? So you move from here to gaining confidence when you end up here, and what we should also try to do is basically not fall down here, but ultimately move the people who are here up here, or at least up here. Okay, so and that's why, by and large, the book is focuses. A great part of the book is focused on actually making people less confident, so they're actually aligned. Their confidence is aligned with their actual abilities. This is what we do with our feedbacks when we provide people with feedback on their judgment, on their EQ, on their managerial potential. And this is the cornerstone of development, not just leadership development, but developing any sort of potential in the context of work interventions or other interventions. Most of what we do with our reports is provide people with accurate feedback on their abilities. And more importantly, accurate feedback also on their weaknesses. Okay, why? Because we know that mostly the reports will highlight some blind spots, some discrepancies between the way you perceive yourself and the way other people perceive you, and that without a sense of direction, without a clear sense of what you could do, what your potential is, and what your weaknesses are, change will only occur in a random way, and improvements will occur only in a random way. So, and again, importantly, we provide people not just with information on their strengths, but also information on their weaknesses, okay? We're not here to help people find their strengths and tell them that everybody's great and you know, what is your unique capability. No, no, no. We focus on the dark side as much as on the bright side. And when it comes to evaluating leadership ability or leadership potential, again, the focus is not on confidence, but on competence. These are the 4 qualities. The literature on leadership is very vast, more than 100 years of research and books and output of serious studies have been compiled. And if you look at the serious literature, there isn't mention of confidence at all. These are the 4 things, the 4 qualities that subordinate or followers in any context truly need in a leader. Not necessarily what they want or what they report that they desire, but what they really like, what they really need to be successful, to be a high-performing team. And if you look at it, not only is confidence not a part of it, but actually most of these key features are enabled when there isn't a surplus of confidence, but the contrary. And over a decade ago, Jim Collins published a seminal book on the subject where he reports the findings that for him were surprising, you know, when he was trying to contrast the profile, the personality of top exceptional leaders who had led really, really successful companies with the profile or personality of people who had been moderately successful or unsuccessful. And he found that in addition to the 4 qualities that I mentioned, the great leaders were amazingly persistent, which you don't do when you are complacent or overconfident and think you're great. You know, you don't persist because you have to perceive a discrepancy between where your goals are and where you are at the moment, and incredibly humble. And that's probably the most important benefit that insecurities or low confidence provide, is the ability to still remain humble, not just to yourself, but also others. But we keep on perpetuating the myth that leadership is about charisma, and charisma disguises confidence as competence. So as my boss, Bob Hogan, who, as you heard, wants me to be worked like a rented mule, always says, say goodbye to the myth of the charismatic leadership. And again, I have a final quiz to leave you thinking. It's actually almost as hard to think of a kind of a female charismatic leader, okay, as it is to think of a famous female delinquent or famous female psychopath, okay. And these things are connected. You can see that I have found a female narcissistic leader and also a female psychopathic delinquent, who is my current president of Argentina. And I've been saying this for some time, and people think, oh, how can you compare her with these other people? You wait and see. You wait and see. And she was elected, and she was promoted, and she is supported purely on the basis of her charisma. On that positive note, I'd like to thank you for your time.